I sent you a message that I need to leave early, so I appreciate the recording as well.
Oh, good. Yay. So it is Wednesday, May 4th, and we are doing Purim Night by Edith Perlman in The New Diaspora, The Changing Landscape of American Jewish Fiction. So as always, I like to begin with, what does Edith look like? And she, I read a lot of interesting things about her and how some people really think she should be more famous than she is. I don't know what that means. I can tell you what it says on her website. She's published more than 250 works of short fiction and nonfiction in national magazines, literary journals, anthologies, and online publication. Her work has appeared in Best American Short Stories, the O. Henry Prize stories. I love O. Henry, and New Stories from the South. And of course, she's in this, and she's also in Binocular Vision, a book that I kept reading about because Purim Night was in there. So before we, jump in, that's the word. Did you like the story?
Yeah.
Marcia Rosenbaum.
Okay. I liked it because it started out, I thought it was going to be really, really depressing. And I wasn't sure I wanted to read it. But by the end, I was glad I read it.
Hear, hear. As soon as I started reading it, I thought, oh, please, I hope I didn't just assign another Holocaust story for us. And I think talking about the displaced persons, besides being personally very interested in that, you don't hear a lot about what happens. And they all the survivors we know went to displaced persons camps.
Yeah.
And for my literary mavens, my first question is, why did they always capitalize person?
It drove me crazy.
Oh, it's a good question.
Lynn Sallet.
They aren't people yet. I mean, they're not humanized. They're in the process of becoming humanized. And so they don't have names. They don't have personalities. They're evolving from this experience. So they are a person. That's a step up from vermits or animal or whatever. Yeah. So I think person is a step below having a name and an identity. To me, that's why they capitalize person.
I think you're absolutely right, and a fascinating way to think about it. Alice.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I agree with that, but also that maybe that was how the officials talked about these people, these very, that they were the persons, so it seems like that the authorities of these displaced persons camps didn't really have the emotional needs and all, in mind, that they just, they were people and they got this amount of food and they got this, place to live, but they didn't really consider the trauma that these people had gone through and their emotional needs, I think.
Judy.
Well, it makes sense to me what Lynn and Alice are saying. I just think if the words had come from an executive or a policeman or someone watching them, I would have understood the capitalizing. I didn't understand it because they were talking about their own people. And I thought that they would have more empathy. She capitalizes some other words in the book as well that I had difficulty with. I just think if you're working there and they're with you, they're more than just a capital P people.
Interesting. Judy Biederman, then Lynn Sallet.
Sort of a vague memory from when I was a kid and people started to come. It wasn't so impersonal as you might assume. I don't think so. But yeah, they were called DPs. And
Yes.
we even had some where I grew up in Newark, Ohio. Believe me, they didn't last too long there because it was too much of a small town for a lot of them. But they were called DPs. But I think there were just so many of them that if you had a group, give them a group name. They were the DPs. And there were so many that unless you had a personal contact with them, you don't have a sense of who they are any more than you would of any other humongous group. So yes, there's an impersonal feeling about it, but I don't know that it could have been any other way. There were so many, and they came out. I mean, there were still a lot of them coming out. There were a lot of they were the DPs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which is why the capitalization of person, DP is also always capitalized.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so I have Lynn, Susan, then Evie. Lynn.
Okay, I have to say, and Vanessa can relate to this, something that Dove Taylor said this weekend really struck me, and I applied it to this story. And you know, if you, Vanessa, you can maybe help me, or Judy, were you there?
I heard, but I wasn't there.
Okay. Anyway, he talked about this Orthodox, really fanatic Orthodox group of people who danced and sang, and they did all the rituals, and
Right.
another person, remember this story? And another person said, how can you say that God commanded you to do all of these things and do all these, follow all these rules and rituals? And he said, and they were, you know, really joyful in doing this. And he said, God did not command us to do this. We commanded ourselves to do this, to demonstrate that we have faith in the darkness, that this is a dark time, and this is something that we have control over, that we can do in spite of what's happened to us. And I feel that Purim Night, the title, is really significant, because if you look at what they do to prepare for this Purim Night, and Judy, I think that these people are helping them, in a sense, find joy in their lives. So I don't think it's impersonal. I think, and all the resourcefulness that they go through to make the costumes, and it just, for me, demonstrated that we are capable of moving on, and we have control over something. You know, you have to have faith in something, and having faith in yourself is probably the first step, because you couldn't have faith in what happened to you or believe in anything that happened to you. So I think that the fact that they made so much of this holiday, and that it was a story of people who were saved, and how do you get saved? I think it's something that you have to be an agent in that. That was my feeling.
Lynn, I totally agree. And of course, the Purim story does not really mention God, but we'll come back to that.
No,
Susan,
but I think that's deliberate.
absolutely. Yeah. Susan, then Evie.
Okay, so first of all, talk about DP. It stands for displaced person. And when they're still called DPs, they're still displaced. It's like these people have no place. There's nothing for them. And so to me, that's very sad. But eventually most of them found a place. But I'd like some talk about this character in the story, the boy Ludwig. A 12-year-old who seems to know so much about adult living. And I mean, thinking about all the sex acts that he observed. And to me, this was more about Purim. It was more about other things, not only about Purim.
I agree with you. I think if you looked at a 12-year-old today in 2022 who hasn't been in school, they're more like 10-year-olds. Whereas 12-year-olds from the Shoah, they had lived a life. And
Yes.
I think Ludwig, shows us how he lived that life. And he's the only one who ends up in Israel.
Right.
He's the only one who ends up. Abby.
Yeah, I just had a totally different relationship to this story. I've always loved the holidays, all of them. And I realized how much I disliked Purim. I always hated it. I always knew that I was not gonna, Eileen is the one who always had the best Queen Esther costume, and her mother ran the office. I went to a Jewish day school, and this was back in, I remember from nursery school time, she always won. Her mother, was about her, and so I have painful memories and almost felt like I was a DP because I was so invisible among the costumes. And I feel that way. I felt that way even later going to Purim kinds of things where everybody was in costume. You didn't know who anybody was. And a certain person that some of us may know who was very difficult always came out on Purim, came out in terms of her personality, was a little bit more flourished on Purim. For some reason, I was always uncomfortable with it. And I never knew what the term lots meant until all of a sudden I saw it written last night. I always heard about Haman and the lots and so on and so forth, but I was always too shy to say, well, what does that really mean?
Right.
I enjoyed the story a lot. But it brought back all those memories of just not liking Purim and just the masquerades and trying to figure out.
I think it's a couple fascinating things. First of all, Purim, Pur is a lot, and they drew lots to see what day they would kill the Jews. And then when they were going to kill the Jews, Esther has Ahasuerus over, and he couldn't rescind the decree, but he said the Jews could arm themselves. So it was a bloody, bloody day. And that is not part of the story that we teach. And listen, let's be honest, we barely talk about Vashti, the whole business. I remember telling a confirmation class, I started talking, Vashti wouldn't dress naked, and the bell rang, and I thought they'd run out. And she goes, you've got to finish the story. What happened? A win for me. So I think that I definitely agree with Lynn that they picked Purim because God is not mentioned. Now, Passover in the Haggadah, God's not mentioned, but obviously it's a big part of, leaving Egypt and the 10 plagues and all of that. So I think that that is very significant. The other thing, Judy Feldman, these people had come from the camps, from ghettos, and there was a hierarchy that the Jewish community,
You bet.
they had, they had their own little government. And this is how the Jewish community for centuries had worked with the non-Jewish community. And this is the first time where, not only did it not work, but, those people were sent to death. And, it was just, they couldn't even imagine what these monsters were doing to the community. And because some of our finest thinkers did not want to be part of the Jewish government, they were killed straight off. And then, Jews of lesser abilities were then put in those positions, and they weren't responsible for anything that happened. Obviously the Nazis were, but it was certainly, though they could be the people still calling them the persons. Alice.
Yeah, in addition to what's already been said about the appropriateness of having them celebrate Purim, I think the way she starts the story, it just sets it, she's talking about the merry celebration when you drink until you can't distinguish the king from the villain. These people were, at a really low place in their lives. And I think the release of, dressing up with whatever they could find in the camp, drinking, having the Hamantaschen, which was such a treat. It just was, I think it was just, for me, it was just this release of all this pent up, sadness and grief and all the horrible things that all these people had gone through, that to celebrate Purim was probably a good way for them to transition in some way.
Yeah. Lynn, and then Merle.
In different parts of the story, there is a emphasis on choice, that they had choices that they could make, which gave them control over their whole lives. If you look at page 40, and difference of opinion. I mean, in the Holocaust, none of this was allowed to the Jews, not choice, not difference of opinion. You couldn't have dissent. In that page, you have the Judaica teacher, the history teacher, and the philosophy professor all expressing different points of view on this issue. That to me was central to the story, because these people were truly coming into freedom. I mean, I think freedom over your own existence, over your own life, makes you a person with a name. I mean, there were names here of the staff. We get Ida, we get Sophia, we get Sonia. So to me, choice is a big thing. And also the woman who's collecting cellophane, all these cellophane pieces that she's she's hoarding it so she can make something valuable out of something not valuable. I mean, that idea of, in Maus, you can see the hoarding that goes on to survivors. But this woman is going to choose life. I mean, that phrase, choose life, has a broader meaning than just living. It has the idea of, I'm going to make a life for myself. So I think it was to me, a very upbeat story. And Vanessa, I think more than Ludwig made it to Israel at the end. He said, we have been
I did
saved.
too.
Oh, I did too.
I
Okay.
did too.
Thank you. All right. I
Okay.
have Merle, then Judy Feldman, and then Elaine. Merle. Oh, wait a minute. There you go. I unmuted you.
Thank you. I thought there was a lot of hope in this story, and you can see they were so ingenious about how they made their costumes. And there was one woman who took their only coat and took the lining out of the coat to make her husband a black, silky looking coat.
That was great.
So he would look like a royal member of the people in Shushan. I just thought that they never gave up, and they all had this other identity before they got there, which was so odd that they were called persons, because some of them were, milliners. The woman who was the milliner, and she was talking about, well, no one needs hats now, but maybe in the future I'll get to make some hats. So I thought the story just brought so much hope to the lives of these people. Thank you.
Judy Feldman.
Right before I started reading the story, there was a piece on TV about the Ukrainian people trying to celebrate Easter.
Oh.
And they were cooking, they were making specialty dishes. They showed all the pictures of everything they were trying to do to get to normalcy. And then I read the story, and it was very emotional. I kept putting the two stories together. And I have to be honest, nothing these days I do without thinking about Ukraine. We have some neighbors here in Glenview who have family there, and we've been trying to participate with them. It's very emotional. And this story, while hopeful, reminded me of the tragedy of the situation in the first place. So to me, it was somewhat bittersweet.
Thank you. Elaine.
Okay, I have a couple points to bring up. I thought it was interesting when they said that the United States, which we all know, did not accept many of these DPs. That was my 1 point. Number 2, I thought that when the woman that made the hats danced with one of the soldiers, then they made a point of getting more rations. And no one has discussed the late sex scene between anybody. And I mean, that was sort of out of the blue. And I'm sure, you can interpret it. It means hope. It means, something. But no one has discussed it. And it was rather graphic, I thought, for that little episode. Okay. So let's hear what someone has to say.
Well, I mean, I think when you're in the Holocaust, you see, I shouldn't say that. I mean, they were under such living conditions where you have no privacy and, I'm sure it's nothing Ludwig hadn't seen before. Lynn.
I was wondering, I thought 2 things. One, and I agree with Elaine, it sort of came out of the blue. However, I think Ludwig may have seen brutal sex scenes versus a loving sex scene. I mean, I think he may have seen soldiers raping women, and that this was a totally sex by choice. Again, choice. They decided they were going to do this versus force. So I actually thought it was a sort of a loving, hopeful sign that they were having sex. That was my.
Yeah, agreed. Joyce.
But I don't think, I agree with you, Lynn, but I don't think it was the first. Maybe this was the first loving one, but there were also people sneaking into storerooms and, cubby holes and, wherever they could. Sex
I
was still
agree with that.
important,
Right.
and wherever people could find a way in a dark corner, they hooked up.
Maybe the difference is that these people didn't have to sneak around to do it, maybe.
True, and they were in love.
Yeah.
Right.
And it just wasn't fulfilling an urge. Yeah,
Okay.
so I do agree with that.
Yeah.
And Ludwig was always around adults. He did not participate with any of the children that played games or anything. He was a silent observer of adults. So he was very precocious and therefore probably wise beyond his years as children who are around adults tend to be.
Yeah, agreed. Like only children and kind of following that footstep. Elaine, I hope we answered some of it. And I want to talk about the rationing system. So first of all, they figured out 2,000 calories a day, which, it's not, it's more than they had in the camps, but still not a bit, it's not a lot of calories. Then and everyone got the same, whether my granddaughter Esme and I would get the same amount, and we'd get chocolate and cigarettes were cash.
Yeah.
And I thought that part was fascinating when they didn't clamp down on the black market, and that's how they got real food and fresh vegetables and all of that by exchanging the American supplies for what they really needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
I thought it was very realistic. I mean, I don't know, but it seemed to be a realistic interpretation.
I thought the
At
addition
least
of the
that
Santa-
part of it.
Judy
I thought-
Feldman, then Judy Biederman.
I thought the addition of the sanitary napkins was fascinating.
Yeah.
It's still a problem.
It never occurred to me. And, oh my God.
It's still a problem.
Yeah.
That's
You can use them to make costumes too.
Yeah, she did.
Right, you still name. Judy Biederman, what did you want to say?
a couple of things. I remember packing, we did this in grade school, Red Cross boxes. It was like part of the day. And I can't remember too much of what was in it. But, they were non-perishable foods, whatever, but always cigarettes. It's only in America that we're so down on smoking. They
Yes.
always were currency. So I remember packing these boxes, whether or not they got to the camps, who knows? But we packed these boxes. And the other thing I wanted to say is, one thing about Purim is it's the night you don't face reality. You're drunk, you're whatever. It's a step back from reality. And she gave a whole page to that, where the mirror breaks and the woman has her little black dress, and then she really looks like a witch. And that's the reality. And the shattering of that in contrast to the extended joy of the Purim Carnival. So I thought she made that very clear. What's reality, what isn't? And you can't look at reality every minute of your life, you'll go crazy. So
Right.
why not have a party?
Yeah, I
You know,
mean,
whatever. So those two things.
I think what you just said, especially given the news cycle we're in right now with the leaked thing from the Supreme Court, and sometimes reality is, I can't watch the news. It's hard to listen to my podcasts. And this year is the 50th anniversary of me becoming a bat mitzvah. And I gave a little Devar Torah and I said, I didn't realize, but Roe was right when I was becoming a bat mitzvah, because Rabbi corrected me, Rabbi Saratan said, it was during 72. That's when it became a law. And so, the reality is, I think is overwhelming, is absolutely overwhelming. Lynn and then Alice.
I was wondering if anyone saw any political overtones in the story. The first, in the first page, and I was wondering why Purim, for all the reasons we talked about Purim, but the story itself, she says, celebrates the release of the Jewish people from a wicked man. And if we look at over history, there have been certain wicked men that men who have taken upon themselves to resurrect hatred toward the Jewish people. And I think Purim and the story, and remember, I remember as a kid when we'd go to Purim carnivals, they'd resurrect the story every time, and the McGregors and the this and the that and the booing, and they always talked about Haman and the wicked, wicked man. And I just thought I just felt a political overtone here. And I'm wondering if it's just me that felt that the story itself was.
Absolutely. But I'm going to call on Alice, then Ellen, then Merle. Wait. I got it. All right. Oh, all right. You're unmuted. We can't see you.
Okay, I don't know what happened. I just.
Right. We can hear you though.
There you are.
Okay, I'm sorry. I pressed something wrong. Anyways, I was just gonna say, out of all the story, this story really resonated with me. I thought it was really so smart and not maybe intuitive, it's not maybe what I would think of, but to put this Purim story, you know, overlap the Purim story with the story of people in a displaced persons camp. I just thought, you know, how many pages was it? 10, 15 pages. I just felt I really got to know these people. And, you know, no, I didn't know everything they had gone through, but I just felt like their lives, their emotional lives and where they were resonated with me very well. And I just thought it was a really, really excellent story.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay, Alan, and then Merle.
Okay, sorry I'm late to the party. I had a
Did you
match early
win?
this morning. We won. Took us
Okay.
3 sets, which is why I was late, but we won. The political, you apparently talked before I got here about why Purim, and the political thing struck me. That could be why Purim to me has always been political. I lived in Israel in the 70s, so it was way before, or 70 to 71, way before the Intifada. But the best costume at the Purim party were I forgot what you call this was before the burqas and you know what we knew about Muslims. The Arabs would wear these coverings, the face coverings.
Keffiyeh,
The keffiyehs, right. The keffiyehs, those were the best costumes, and it was always politicized in terms of, you know, this was a fairly liberal kibbutz. They were settlers from Poland. But then fast forward to most of our association with Purim is from our synagogues. I remember way back, for whatever reason, Rabbi Marks hated Purim. He liked to just ignore the holiday. But then when Dov and Judith came in, Judith was amazing with her portrayal of Vashti, and there was some whatever the word is, politicalization. That's not the word. You know what I mean. And now today, we're, you know, I don't know, we all should go to Purim parties because we have that opportunity to do phenomenal costumes. But I agree, the story was really interesting because of all the references to
Yeah,
Purim.
agreed. Merle.
I think Ludwig raises the question about why did the Purim story have a happy ending? And they keep telling him, oh, it was a miracle, it was a miracle. And he says, I do not believe in miracles, especially miracles accomplished by the fuck. And so he's really, you know, talking about what are the machinations and negotiations that really went on to give anything a happy ending. And here's this little 12-year-old boy suggesting that every outcome is caused by manipulation, negotiations, and things that are not as obvious as it seems. So I thought that was very smart of a 12-year-old boy. And there was another thing in the story about a woman who had very thick, beautiful hair. And then they gave this huge summary of all the awful things that she had survived. So inside, she might have been completely torn apart, but you couldn't see it because her hair was still thick and lovely and curly. And I thought that is so true of many victims of these tragedies, that they look very nice. You can't always tell by looking. And I thought that was a major thing, that there was a lot of survival among these people, strength to survive. And that story of the curly hair was a metaphor for all of them.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm throwing it out there. Why did nobody dress up as Haman? Lynn, and then Susan, and then Judy.
They didn't want evil coming into their joy. I mean, they had enough evil. So they were, you know, that was not even a consideration for them. They could talk about him, but they didn't want him at their party.
Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, I was going to kind of say the same thing, in that he was a representation of Hitler.
Yes. That is exactly what I think. That, you know, Judy Feldman.
I was going to say the same.
Yeah. I mean, that you have the most evil man of all history, Hitler. So to have somebody, you know, dress up, it's just incongruous. You know, I think that, Susan.
That there was also a part where they talked about all the men having a little thin black mustaches.
Right.
Yeah.
And if that isn't Hitler, I don't know what is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. my paternal grandfather had one of those really thin mustaches. And it's something that I, vividly remember. And he, lived through World War II. He was too old to, to fight in the war. But yeah, that might be, I don't know, a cultural fashion statement. So, there was a lot of talk about, Ida and Sophia and who's beautiful, and how does the whole legend of Queen Esther and the kernel of the whole story lie in this passage? So first of all, the Judaica teacher on page 40 says the Lord, not Esther, had intervened to save the Jews, which is not part of the story, not part of the scroll. On page 45, king, queen, wise men, and the occasional hero. Nobody dressed as Haman, I just said. And on 47, they've been saved again. And that's why, well, we've said it's such a hopeful story. On page 38, a girl with good looks and a beautiful hat can work miracles. And I thought the passage about the milliner was fascinating because certainly in the 40s, I'm going to say through the 50s, you didn't go out without a hat. Am I right?
Right.
Yes.
At Temple Sholom, the chairs, which I don't think they've replaced, there's under each chair is somewhere, and someone said, "What is that?" I said, "That's a place to put your hat, not to put your prayer book. It's a place to put your hat." And women wore gloves. And it wasn't so long ago, Susan.
Yeah, please. I remember leaving on my honeymoon.
Me
With
too.
a hat and gloves and high heels. I mean, that was the way we dressed.
So
So I think this story does tell us a little bit about that. And wait, I want to read one passage here. What's so good about Purim Night is that it's such a sweet story, and it's set in a dismal place. A displaced persons camp in Germany in 1947, populated by war refugees, concentration camp survivors, and former prisoners of war. When they started talking about the alcohol, and they said, I hope he didn't get into the methanol, and that because someone at the Polish DP camp had drank that and died, which it's not funny, but that was again, it's just something you don't think about. One of the characters even recounts the deaths of her husband, best friend, her time in a concentration camp, her one rape and many beatings. But this editor says, I'd still call this story sweet. I think it's partly because there's a glimpse of a beautiful love story in it, an easy but miraculous love, and a surprise for the reader. So it also says, the ending is difficult. The woman who has lost her husband and best friend is fixated on going to Israel. There she is sure she will be saved. The sad naivety of this, her need for this hope, and the awful reality of such dreams today makes a grueling moment, which is, I'm sure, exactly what Perlman intends. So I don't know if you thought the ending was sweet, hopeful, whatever. Elaine and then Joyce.
I remember now thinking how many of the soldiers married from the war, how many brides were brought over from various places. So, that rang true. I thought it was I have no idea, but what I thought, it was a fairly truthful interpretation of life without being so dark. It was dark in some ways because it told the people's story, but I thought it was a good representation and gave you, as I think Judy said, an insight into their life. And as far as being political, today, we keep making the same mistakes. And there's a saying, if you don't learn by your mistakes, you keep making it. And we as a world keep making the same mistakes.
You are unfortunately correct. Alice.
I just wanted to comment on, the last lines, where Ludwig says we have reached Palestine. And I thought it was significant that it says he wrote it in Hebrew. So, to me, it was like looking forward, that when also he was just a young boy. So he had his whole life, fortunately, to live. I mean, he was very scarred, obviously, but still, I just thought that added to the hopefulness, because it was like he was gonna embrace being an Israeli, and, embracing the language, I think, is the first step, and that he was on the way to doing that.
Absolutely. Judy Feldman. Wait, Joyce. Sorry.
I had a question. I never associated Purim with getting drunk. To me, Purim was dressing up, dressing the kids up, and then going to temple for a carnival.
Right.
But I never associated it with adults and drinking. I don't know how I missed that.
So there's a part of Purim called Adalodia, which means ad lo yodea, that you drink until you don't know the difference between Haman and Mordecai. If you delve deeper into this, on college campuses, that's when Chabad, serves liquor and all the kids flock there. I'm not going to, I could name which of my children used to do that. So it is a big thing. And I think as Macomb, as when we think of being inclusive and all of that, we realize that type of, I don't know what to call it, that type of drinking is not always a welcome thing. And some of our members, are in 12-step programs, and that, offers that, it's a roadblock for them. It's not something that they want to participate in. So it's something in the past couple of years, certainly, that we've been very cognizant of, but at the same time, doing things in moderation.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Judy, Judy.
Okay, here I am. The question I had was, you forget sometimes when you're reading that of the time frame, because when they kept referring to Palestine, I kept thinking to myself, why aren't they talking about Israel? Well, because it wasn't Israel yet. But you see Palestine, and I have all kinds of triggers when I hear Palestine. So for me reading this too, I had to remember the time frame, because Palestine made me crazy.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Lynn.
I just thought of something when we were talking about the present and the past and how they're moving forward. I think a real positive sign is that they don't necessarily forget their past and what they were. And the Sonia says, I'll make hats again. And I think this was Ada, who said she had been a free spirit once. So I think the fact that you can, shows a sign of health, that you can talk about your past that had some horrific things in it, but that there were things that you did want to retain, which makes you a person, which makes you a person who was whole at one time. And going through the Holocaust certainly splinters you, as it did that mirror, but that they can retain some of their identity and not have to dwell on all the horrible aspects of their life. They can, they can integrate the past and the present and the future as a whole person.
Judy Biederman.
Actually, Ludwig is one of the characters we don't know very much about. He opens and he closes this story, but clearly he couldn't have been in a camp or he would have been executed. So because we don't know much about him. So maybe he was a hidden child.
He tells us that he was hidden.
We don't know much about him. So he doesn't really have a past like the adults. To us, the reader, we don't know. But I think he's symbolic of always our hope is in the children. You look at the news every night, there are the children in Kyiv and wherever being rescued, being saved as much as possible. And that's what I think Ludwig is. He's the symbol of the future. Mm-hmm. And we don't know anything about him, where he came from, whatever. And he's a pretty savvy kid, but he's got a future. And so he represents the future for Jews, and particularly a future for Israel. So that was very clever. He's in the first line and the last line.
Yeah. And with a very German name.
Oh, yes.
Ludwig.
Yes.
There's not a lot of Ludwigs in the preschool here. Susan.
Yeah, and it also said that he spoke German.
Sure.
And that they did say he was hiding out with his uncle,
Yeah,
and that he was thin, and he had been thin before.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they did tell us a little bit about him.
He was a spoiled kid. We don't know much about him, but he's the future.
When you were talking about Purim and Purim Carnival, I also never heard about the drunk business. I never knew about that. But just a little bit of an aside, on my third date with my husband, he took me to Hillel to Purim Carnival at Hillel at the University of Illinois, and actually kissed me for the first time in the parking lot there. And ever since, we have always been given generous donations to that Hillel because it had such special meaning for us regarding Purim Carnival.
Well, as well you should. I'm always going to think of that now, Susan. Merle.
One of my favorite passages where they were describing how they were making the hamantaschen, and they were using a butter substitute and blackberry preserves, and they were making ersatz hamantaschen. And it made me think of the story of One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, where no matter how horrible it was in the gulag, at the end of the day, they'd be given a little loaf of bread with sugar sprinkled on top. So as long as you have some good food, and there are moments of joy, and also the rationing, they could only come up with maybe 2 hamantaschen per person, but they were starting to figure in that the babies wouldn't be eating hamantaschen, so maybe they could stretch that out a little bit. And I thought that was realistic, that even in the worst circumstances, food can bring you moments of joy.
I think it's very fascinating, and I had some colleagues who have since passed away, but Holocaust survivors, and they always had food, like candy bars hidden in their bookcases. And, food was just a huge part of their survival and how they got on. So I think that how they made it a part of this story was fascinating, because we can all imagine hamantaschen, and every week we order for the oneg, and I think certainly my greatest anxiety, fear is like, you don't want to run out of cookies at the oneg. Like, we can afford it, you don't run out of, but you don't want to have so much extra that it's waste. So even, in 2022, we still think about well, how much is this one going to eat? And, and you should have fruit and this and that. And so it's just, it's certainly still with us. And well, I love home and Tasha, and I like Purim. I like to get dressed up. And I think that certainly the Purim spiel, which Legacy Lakeside, kind of brought over. And I know that Legacy Solel did it. And it can be a very fun evening and not necessarily filled with, the introspection or, al chet, forgiving your sins of Yom Kippur or the High Holy Days. So, and it's also like towards the spring. And I think that was happening in the story. And that they had those costumes, like, she got out the black dress, which as soon as she put it on, you knew it was going to be too big. You knew it wasn't going to fit her because they hadn't been eating. Alice?
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment. I've been listening to people saying, I don't remember the drunkenness, the drinking for Purim, and I don't really remember that either. I think back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, whenever we were all growing up, that there was more emphasis on the kids in Purim. And I think synagogues now have realized, this is a holiday it's more not just for the kids. And I think it's synagogue life that has made that happen, in the 80s, 90s, now the thousands and the teens. I think there's been a change from when we were growing up.
Right. I'm going to take, I'm pretty sure this is true. Reform Judaism wanted to go back to decorum. They did not want the kids running around. They did not, getting drunk would not have been looked upon, in these, classically reformed congregations. And I think it was part of decorum. And then as people started wanting more ritual and wanting more of that in their lives, you see that kind of change. And I think that in Orthodox synagogues and, Chabad is really since World War II, but in those more traditional communities, you saw that happening. And I don't know if you want to call it decorum or lack of decorum. It's a fascinating thing to go into, an Orthodox space and the kids are running and screaming. And, if that happened in a Reform space, it's not usually, it's not what we do. I'll say it that way, so yeah. Any other comments, questions? I'm glad you like this. Joyce.
I had a surprise. I was kind of shocked to find out that Sonia was American and volunteering.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Listen, I think Americans, have volunteered through all of this. And obviously, JFK's, what was his program?
Peace Corps.
Peace Corps. Yes, thank you.
Takes a village.
It does take a village. That would have been bugging me all day. Peace Corps was in the 60s, at least I know that much. But I think these types of, volunteering and some of Nicole Krauss's books, the Americans who were in Israel and the stuff they were doing. So, but you can only imagine that was it wasn't not an easy task. In 2 weeks, on May 18th, we're reading The Smoothest Way is Full of Stones by Julie Oranger. And if you've read The Invisible Bridge, and I think The Flight Portfolio, also by her, I only read the latter. The former is, a lot of her stuff is Holocaust adjacent. So we'll take a look at this in 2 weeks. Friday night, Ali Mafik is becoming a bat mitzvah. Rabbi Mafik and Rabbis Mafik and Mafik, Ari and Evan's daughter. The congregation is invited. And I would be remiss if I did not tell everyone, you're the first to hear this. May 15th, Jill Wine-Banks, Lynn Sallet led me to her. We will be in person with lox and bagels.
Wait, I thought that was this weekend. I thought that was this Sunday.
No, this Sunday, it's Mother's Day. You have the day off.
Oh, so it's the Sunday after that. Thank you. I put it on my calendar for this week.
Yeah. It's in 2 weeks.
Okay, well, I'm going to be out of town. Darn it.
Well,
All
it'll
right.
be taped.
I will, yeah, all right, it'll be taped. Did we discuss taking the summer months off before I got here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to go a little bit into June. And I will send out the dates. My daughter Lital is due the beginning of July and needs help. So I will be out in DC, and then we'll take off July and August. And we wish Ellen the best in her tennis.
Thank you. I will miss you all. I will miss you. I don't think I will see you after this until September.
All right.
All right, enjoy. Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank
All
you,
right.
thank you.
We'll see
Take care.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Mother's Day all.
Yeah, happy Mother's Day.
Yes, happy Mother's Day, everybody.
Bye-bye.